Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cracking open a really crucial guide. It's for resource parents in Alaska who want to pull out the real-world advice, cut through the legalese and get straight to the heart of what you need to know. Because let's be honest, the idea of becoming a foster parent is, well, it's incredibly admirable, but it can also feel a bit daunting, right? All those rules, the forms, the questions. What can you actually do for a child in your care? And maybe more importantly, why are those rules even there? So our mission today is really to help you feel informed and empowered, whether you're just thinking about fostering or you're already a dedicated resource parent in Alaska. We've got this detailed guide in front of us, Alaska Foster Care, Guide for Resource Parents, and we're going to extract those essential nuggets, really dive deep.
Absolutely. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this guide tries to balance that critical need for safety and structure with the really profound desire for children in care to experience as normal a childhood as possible. We'll be focusing quite a bit on something called the reasonable and prudent parent standard. It's kind of a foundational framework for a lot of decisions. And we'll clarify where those boundaries really lie.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
So imagine you're a resource parent in Alaska, right? And you've got those can-I questions just buzzing your head. We're going to dive into the answers. Looking at everything from, everyday choices to the more significant decisions, giving you a sort of compass for this journey. So the guide kicks off with this reasonable and prudent parent standard, or RPPS. That sounds pretty fundamental. What does it actually mean for a foster parent day to day? How does it, change things?
Well, this standard is really about enabling normalcy and empowering foster parents. It allows you to make the kinds of, thoughtful, common sense decisions any good parent would make for their child. Historically, foster parents often needed state approval for almost everything, every little activity. And that created this sense of otherness for the kids, plus a huge administrative burden. The RPPS changes that. It lets children engage in activities typical for their age without needing constant granular approval from OCS at the Office of Children's Services. It's really a recognition that kids thrive when they can participate just like their peers. It helps reduce that stigma that can come with foster care.
That sounds like a really profound shift, almost like a move towards trusting foster parents more, trusting their judgment. So practically speaking, what kind of normal activities are we talking about here? Like things that are generally okay under RPPS? What about simple things like, say, sports or school clubs, even sleepovers? What does the guide actually say?
Precisely. The guide explicitly mentions those things as generally okay under RPPS. Think about it. A foster child is already dealing with immense change. Being told they can't join the band because of forms or miss a sleepover. That's tough. The RPPS helps cut through that kind of red tape. It allows them to have those normal experiences, which fosters a crucial sense of belonging, stability. And when it comes to things like grooming and clothing, you're responsible for keeping the child clean, appropriately groomed, providing clothes that fit and are right for the weather. Routine haircuts that just maintain the child's basic style, absolutely fine. The key thing, though, is always to check the case plan first and be really careful, especially ensuring that any cultural or religious hair practices are respected. That's critical.
Okay. That raises an important point. Beyond just, reducing paperwork, what's the deeper impact of this RPPS standard? How does it specifically help reduce stigma and really contribute to a child's overall well-being?
Oh, it's crucial because it fosters that sense of belonging, of self-worth. When children in foster care are sort of held back from typical childhood activities, they often feel isolated, different. The RPPS actively fights that by enabling them to just be kids first and foster kids second. That makes sense? It helps build resilience, develop social skills, and just reduces the emotional weight of their situation. It's a fundamental shift towards prioritizing child well-being, recognizing that normalcy is key for healthy development. And often the best decisions come from the adults right there, providing that daily care.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But, okay, while RPPS empowers, there must be limits, right? Areas where that reasonable parent standard stops and you need specific permission. Let's talk about medical care first. How does that work? What's the protocol for, say, routine checkups versus more serious medical needs? And why the difference?
Right, so you'll need to keep the consent for emergency and routine medical care form handy. That covers things like well-child checks, scheduled immunizations, general appointments. That's all considered routine essential care. However, for non-emergency major care things, surgeries, psychotropic medications, even some elective vaccines like HPV or COVID in many cases, that requires more. You'll need birth parent consent, or if parental rights are terminated, then OCS consent. The, in many cases, part for elective vaccines often relates to situations where it's not immediately life-saving, so the legal guardian's consent is paramount. The absolute key is always loop in the caseworker. These decisions have significant, potentially long-lasting impacts. There are complex legal and ethical sides to it, so that broader approval process is essential.
Okay, that tiered approach definitely makes sense. Matching the level of decision-making power to the impact of the decision. So, following that logic, how does this apply to education? Can a foster parent just pick any school or decide to homeschool? Or are there specific rules?
The default is public school. That's usually about consistency and access to resources. Any alternative like private school or homeschooling absolutely requires department approval. And critically, you cannot just transfer schools without the caseworker's permission. It's not just about, keeping things consistent. It can be strategic. The school choice might be tied to the reunification plan, maybe proximity to birth parents for visits facilitated through school events, or maybe the child has specific educational needs outlined in their case plan that only certain schools can meet. So changing schools isn't just a logistical thing. It can really impact their whole case, their future stability.
Right. Okay. That's a really important context.
Yeah.
What about travel? If you're a resource parent, can you take a child on a trip, maybe a weekend getaway or something longer?
The guide says short, in-state trips under 3 days are generally fine under RPPS. But if you're planning a longer in-state trip or any out-of-state travel, you absolutely must get OCS approval beforehand, in advance. This is really about ensuring safety and accountability, especially if you cross state lines where legal jurisdictions can get complicated. It also lets OCS maintain communication, know the child's whereabouts for safety, and make sure there aren't clashes with things like family visits or court dates. It's just maintaining that necessary oversight.
Makes sense. And speaking of safety, you mentioned certain higher risk activities also need caseworker approval. What sort of things fall into that category? And why the extra step?
Yeah, this includes activities like driving or getting permits for a child, supervised handling of firearms, which obviously carries significant responsibility contact sports, things involving propelled objects like paintball, and even airborne activities beyond normal commercial flights, like maybe a small plane ride or something. These aren't necessarily flat nose, but they're definitely let's discuss this first activities because of the inherent risks involved. The caseworker needs to weigh these things against the child's specific needs, their history, the case plan, potential liability, just to make sure the decision is truly in their best interest and follows safety protocols.
Okay. And this brings us to something that can be really significant for kids' personal expression through appearance. What if a child wants, say, a tattoo or a piercing or maybe a really drastic haircut?
Yeah.
How are those decisions handled?
Well, Alaska law is crystal clear on one thing. Tattoos on minors are illegal, period. So that's a non-starter. For piercings, you need written consent from a legal guardian, and they usually need to be present. As a foster parent, you shouldn't authorize that without specific OCS direction. OCS is often the legal guardian, or they need to get birth parent consent. Drastic hairstyle changes, especially if they have cultural significance, definitely need consultation first with the caseworker, the parents, and potentially tribal representatives. These decisions can really impact a child's identity, their connection to their heritage. So it's a very delicate balance between respecting the child's autonomy and considering all the legal and cultural factors. The guidance is always err on the side of caution and consult.
Absolutely. Okay, moving beyond permissions, there were some fundamental non-negotiables, things related directly to a child's safety and well-being. Discipline is a huge one. What are the absolute rules there?
Zero corporal punishment. Absolutely none. That means no spanking, no slapping, no physical discipline of any kind. Full stop. Physical restraint is only, and I mean only, permissible to prevent imminent harm to the child or others. And if it ever occurs, it must be reported immediately to OCS. This is just a critical part of creating a safe, non-abusive environment. It reinforces that children in care are protected from physical harm. The focus is on positive behavior management, de-escalation techniques.
Right. And what about privacy? That's so important for every child, but maybe especially for kids who've experienced trauma. What are the rules around their personal space, their belongings?
Indeed. Foster parents absolutely must respect a child's bedroom and bathroom privacy. There are very strict rules against things like pat searches, body searches, or strip searches. Those can be deeply re-traumatizing. Also, you generally cannot open a child's mail or their messages unless it's explicitly stated as part of the case plan, or you have very specific approval from OCS. This protects their personal space, their communication rights. It helps foster that sense of security and trust, which is just vital for healing and healthy development. It's about building a foundation of respect.
That's so important. Okay, what about alternate caregivers? Like babysitters, can you just ask a neighbor, or are there specific rules for who can watch a foster child if you need to be away?
You can choose sitters who also meet that reasonable and prudent parent standard. So, responsible adults who you trust to make sensible decisions for the child's safety and well-being. However, for longer stretches, the guide defines that as over 24 hours, up to 14 days, you need to follow specific OCS rules. This usually involves making sure the sitter has all the necessary information about the child, their care plan, and often requires getting pre-approval for that sitter. The best advice is always check with your worker for the current local process. Rules can sometimes vary slightly by region, and you need to ensure that continuity of care and proper oversight.
Got it. Okay, this has been a great dive into the practicalities, but we wouldn't be complete without touching on the broader context. Things like the rights of foster parents themselves, the really unique cultural considerations in Alaska, and the path towards permanency for these kids. Let's start with the foster parents. What rights do they have in this system?
That's a great question. Alaska actually has a Resource Family Bill of Rights. This means that you, as a foster parent, have rights. Rights to information about the child placed with you, their history, their needs, things that help you care for them effectively. You also have the right to notice before non-emergency placement moves, and importantly, a way to challenge those moves. That's vital for stability. Plus, rights to training, clear communication with OCS, and a fair hearing if there are licensing actions. And if serious issues come up, OCS has a formal grievance process. So foster parents do have a voice and ways to address concerns. It's meant to be a partnership.
Okay, now this next part feels especially crucial for Alaska. The guide highlights the Indian Child Welfare Act, or ICWA. This is such a powerful and vital law. For listeners who might be less familiar, can you give us a little background, the historical context and its impact on foster care in Alaska?
Yes, absolutely. To really understand ICWA, you have to look back at the history. For decades, tragically, many indigenous children, American Indian and Alaska Native children, were systematically removed from their families and communities. It was often part of forced assimilation policies, severing those vital cultural ties. ICWA, passed back in 1978, was landmark federal legislation specifically designed to stop that trend and reverse the damage. It's not just a guideline. It's a legal imperative that applies if a child involved in the child welfare system is eligible for membership in a federally recognized tribe. This law prioritizes placement preferences within the tribe, ensures the tribe is involved at every stage of the case, and profoundly emphasizes maintaining cultural connection.
Wow. So how does that translate into practice for a resource parent? How do you ensure that tribal involvement is genuinely meaningful? What specific things does ICWA require that really change how care is provided?
It means a much deeper layer of consultation and respect is required. As a resource parent, you must involve the child's tribe in decisions. Your caseworker is there to guide you on how to do that respectfully and effectively. ICWA mandates specific placement preferences. The first preference is with a member of the child's extended family. Second, with other members of the child's own tribe. Third, with another Indian family. This is fundamentally about cultural survival, healing, ensuring the child's heritage is preserved and honored. So for a resource parent, it means being acutely aware of the child's tribal affiliation, actively seeking input from tribal representatives, and understanding that even what seems like a minor decision, like a haircut, could have profound cultural significance.
That's incredibly important context. Thank you. Finally, let's touch on the practicalities of finances. And what happens if adoption becomes the path forward? What does the financial support look like? And how does adoption from foster care typically work in Alaska?
Okay, so there's a monthly foster care rate. It's designed to cover those day-to-day expenses, clothing, food, school supplies, the basics, recognizing the costs of raising a child. There's also the possibility of augmentation for children who have higher needs or special needs, reflecting the additional resources their care might require. Now, for those considering adoption, most adoptions from foster care in Alaska happen when reunification with the birth parents isn't possible, and it's often the foster parents or relatives who adopt. Typically, the child needs to have lived with you for about 6 months before the adoption can be finalized. That allows for a period of adjustment and stability. And Alaska does offer adoption and guardianship subsidies. These are tailored to the child's specific needs to help support the family long term. Plus, there's robust post-adoption support available through organizations like ACRF, that's the Alaska Center for Resource Families. They provide ongoing resources and a sense of community.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for you, the listener? We've journeyed through the practical side of fostering in Alaska, from that empowering, reasonable, and prudent parent standard, all the way to the critical areas needing specific permission and those fundamental non-negotiable boundaries that protect children.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really underscores the immense responsibility, but also the profound privilege of fostering. It's a role demanding both flexibility, that's the RPPS part, and also unwavering adherence to clear guidelines for those more significant decisions. And always, always with the child's best interest and their unique background, especially their cultural heritage, right at the core. The system is designed to provide support, absolutely, but also to ensure accountability, safety, and the well-being of kids in care.
Which brings us to a final question for you to maybe ponder. In a system that's trying to balance structure and normalcy, how can you as a resource parent best advocate for the individual needs of a child, particularly children from diverse cultural backgrounds, navigating all the legal and cultural complexities we see in a state like Alaska? How can you ensure you're more than just a temporary caregiver, but really a true guide to that child's normal life, whatever that looks like for them, setting them on a path towards permanency and belonging? For those of you who are hungry for even more detail, the sources we touched on point to some fantastic resources. There's the Alaska OCS Foster Care website, the actual regulations known as 7 AEC 67. That's a detailed rulebook, essentially. Also ACRF, the Alaska Center for Resource Families, a key hub for training and advocacy. And specific guides on ICWA and adoption subsidies are out there too. They're all available for you to continue your own deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this Essential Deep Dive today. We really hope this has illuminated the path a bit for current and future resource parents in Alaska, giving you the knowledge to make informed, impactful decisions. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep making a difference.